And everyone, how many of us are there? There's 32. So I think people are mic'd. So I think my job is to remind you to remain mic unless you want to ask a question. Or muted, sorry, is what I meant to say. And once you do unmute yourself, you can ask a question. Paul or one of the panelists want to start with a question or a comment that others can comment on, or do we want to throw it open here? I'm open to suggestions at this point.
Well, one of the things that I'd love to hear, Anthony, if you don't mind me jumping in, is this is a question that I get a lot, and it's something that, as part of the tourism task force, I will be asked to answer. But for businesses that have applied for the different programs at both the provincial and the federal government level, you've had some degree of success or not. But the question is, where are the gaps? What is it that is still missing? Notwithstanding the criteria needs to change for the small and medium business grant program, et cetera. I alluded to that in the earlier session. But what are you finding are the gaps that haven't yet been met by any provincial or federal program? That's what I'm curious about.
So as a reminder to everyone, and I'm going to open this up because I think that's a great place to start, Walt. Walt Judas is the president and CEO of the Tourism Industry Association of BC, and his job on behalf of us all is to take forward where the gaps are to government. I'm doing the same in partnership with Walt, and I also work with Paul on some of the recovery efforts around gaps. But I love this question. So Walt, it's an excellent place to start. Anyone with a business or a comment that wants to unmute yourself and make a comment on where the gap is. We had heard, Walt, maybe people can get their thoughts together. One of the things we heard was about queues. Walt, any comment on that and from what you're hearing?
Yeah, I think on the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy, of course, that's been extended now through until mid next year, and that's good. I think the other one that was a problem was CERB, if I recall correctly, and there were problems with that, and now that has transitioned to employment insurance, so some of those issues may be resolved. Ironically, when the industry was struggling so badly, and we've been calling for all of these different measures, the interesting thing is that many employers around the province were having a difficult time hiring people because they were getting the benefit, and they would have rather stayed on the sidelines and earned more money than actually working in a place. I think that problem is slowly going away because of the transition of that program into, as I say, employment insurance. But there are other programs like that, CEBA, I believe, is being extended. So that's the small business grant program that the federal government has in place as well, that is up to 40,000 in small business loans, 10,000 forgivable, and that's being extended to 20,000 forgivable and 60,000 available. So the various levels of government are listening, but there are gaps to be sure. And I'd love to hear from you if you've identified any of those.
Okay. Anyone?
A couple in the chat that have come in. I'm typing one in to get it going, but there's a few others as well that have come in.
Oh, here, yeah, sorry, I'm just trying to catch up here. Richard has a long one comment here from Horn Lake Caves about seasonal. Maybe I'll give it a read and I'll come back to it. One of the questions that's kind of related to what's happening with tourism is the ripple impacts that are going out to retail. Paul, coming from the city, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Retail, and I would, say restaurant, and the other thing that is not often talked about is anything to do with the meetings and convention business as well too. Everything from the event planners to the florists to the catering companies and all that type of stuff that is often unseen, except because of business to business activities. So retail, it depends on what town or city or village you live in, but I know certainly in Victoria, highly reliant on kind of making their profit. The tourism season and Christmas are very important for retailers, as I've gotten to know the various business improvement associations. And when you take that whole slice away, it's very challenging from a profitability perspective. Particularly the other thing we forget about is Canadians are not necessarily big spenders. You know, we're used to US or overseas visitors, Japanese visitors or European that have foreign exchange advantages and other things and are more free spending. So we've, you know, all of us have been encouraged to shop local, and that's been very helpful. But I don't think true profitability will come back again until international markets are open for those retailers. So I think all government programs need to recognize that you know, they need to take into account that it's the retailers, restaurants, and those behind the scenes have been very heavily affected, and the commercial rent, you know, it's coming. The son or daughter of CRCA is rolling out, and we're hopeful that's a more generous program.
Okay, great, thanks. Well, can I ask you a favor and read what Richard wrote about queues so that you can maybe comment on that? It's in the chat feature.
Yeah. Sorry, Anthony, I did have a chance to read through that. You know, that's one of those anomalies that is difficult for government to address, but they are certainly aware of it, that a lot of seasonal operations that still have those fixed costs, including salaries, actually lose access to the wage subsidy because they aren't operating at certain times of the year, and there's no way to measure revenue during those periods. And so that is something that we have communicated to government. I know they've taken some steps to address seasonal operators, but I want to take this one under consideration and communicate again to the federal government and with our partners at TIAC some of these issues and how they could be addressed. I alluded to on the call earlier that we're trying to set up a meeting with, or sorry, it was on a separate call, I think earlier today. We're trying to set up a meeting at the federal level with the minister responsible for tourism to point out these anomalies. And so if we have a list of them, I'm happy to share those and see how we can address them.
Okay, thank you.
I just wanted to add to that, Anthony. Was it Richard in the comments there? Yeah, I just learned about that as well, and we're gonna have some trouble there too. It's becoming an issue with the wage subsidy because of our we're seasonal and our revenue is low during the fall and the winter and the spring. So I just learned about that, and so I'm hoping those high-level discussions will happen. I did want to add something too, because I know for us as a small business, we had to triage our bill payments, and this is, you know, I just want to add this to the conversation, because the subsidies don't cover everything, and when you have to decide which bills to pay, you know, some bills go late, so then therefore it affects your credit rating. Therefore, you're not going to be able to access commercial loans out of this, right? If your credit rating goes down. So I haven't heard any discussion around that in any other circles, but I would love some discussion around that and how to mitigate that part of it.
Okay, thank you. People are putting lots into chat, which is great. I must admit, I'm gonna have a hard time getting to them all at this rate. There's a couple here. I want to loop back to the e-commerce part of it, because I see some people talking back and forth on it, and it is extremely important. But one of the questions that was also in our panel, gentlemen, and others, was around air service. So, and I did want to ask it earlier, so I'm going to bring it up now. We're on an island or a set of islands. Air service is so important. We were very proud of where we were going with our, you know, in Nanaimo, Comox, and Victoria. The question here, Paul, if you can see it, is about what can smaller DMOs do to encourage support of carriers to come, you know, as we rebuild. I think it's going to be a challenge. You talked about using limited funds yourself to do a buy-in program. What are your thoughts on that? Because it's complicated, as we know. The question specifically is about using MRDT for that. Yeah,
and MRDT is a very controversial topic to begin with, and most DMOs have had their MRDT decimated. For one point in time, ours was down 95%. So it's, so when the question of doing an air route partnership with MRDT and a commercial carrier becomes very fraught very quickly. We're fortunate in Victoria, we have a different stream of revenue with our hotel partners and others. We were a bit more flush, but using MRDT to support airlines is a very controversial topic. And I think that probably deserves a lot of judicious discussion. Because MRDT is designed to promote tourism promotion, and air service can be both inbound and outbound. So I'm not really taking a position one way or another, but I think like every partnership, it's about sitting down and understanding each other's objectives and having those discussions. With regards to MRDT, we are obligated, because it's a tax mechanism linked to provincial sales tax, to disclose how MRDT is spent. We have to submit a one-year plan in advance. So if things such as using MRDT for air route development, that needs to be disclosed 1 year in advance. So I think those are important considerations. It's not like the old days where it used to be called additional hotel room tax, AHRT. I mean, Walt will remember those days where we could be much more free spending and liberal in how we used that mechanism. There is much more tighter controls around it.
Thank you. Anyone else before I move on from that? And we're going to talk about e-commerce in a second, because I really do want many voices chipping in on that, particularly from operators, if you can. Don Bonner asked a question that I do want to acknowledge, and some of the people on the panel can jump in, or other professionals around this table. And that is, how do we build back better? Are we building back better? Are we just hoping to go back to what we were? And I, for one, am a big believer that we need to build back better, and we need to bring things into our planning. Now's the opportunity to do things differently. And I don't know what we had. Maybe now's the time to be looking at building this differently. And that's certainly our approach here at Tourism Vancouver Island with our own business, and also how we engage with many groups across the island is asking some of those questions. So I think it's a really excellent question that you're asking. Don't necessarily have all the answers, but I think we need to be looking. And part of the reason what I wanted to touch on here with this is we've been spending a lot of time looking around the world at what other jurisdictions are doing, whether it's New Zealand or elsewhere, and there's a number of them, and they're all looking at doing things differently. There's things where there are capacity issues in certain parts of the world, and they're looking at doing things differently post-COVID. So these are all things that I think are super important on the island. And so, Don, you asked a great question. Anybody else want to just make a comment on that? Because it could go on for quite a while on that topic, but go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, just that we were all very much focused on measuring and managing our carbon footprint before this, and it will remain important in recovery. Very much listening to our communities and their priorities. We've recently done some surveying in Victoria to make sure that our efforts are aligned with what the citizens would like to see out of their community and tourism coming back. We're pleased to see a 97% approval rating for the tourism industry and how it's being handled, which is not always what's in the media. So that's exciting. But I think building back better and also building back more deliberate. The other thing that we're very focused on, and everyone who's kind of more progressive in this industry, is really taking a stand around inclusivity. And that has a lot of meanings, but I think these are now moving to the top of the agenda, along with environmental sustainability. And if they're, part of our own accountabilities, we'll be deliberate in building back. And, it won't be the same as it was before. It will have to evolve. And I think we're seeing that happen right now, actually. But it will be a process. And, government programs can certainly help. Clean BC was a good program. Our industry has a lot of capital intensive businesses such as motor coaches and other things. Hotels need to retrofit, and that will take some partnership.
Great. Thank you.
Definitely just wanted to add just a quick, I know for us at Seawolf, we're looking to hit the reset button and market differently, create more partnerships. I believe Vancouver Island is a destination in itself. And so we're looking, after this, I'll be connecting with Paul to see how we can connect the South Island to the North Island, right? And clothing lines, like Seawolf Swag, sustainability. Our First Nations governments, I think these conversations needs to happen with all of our First Nations and move forward together. So I'm looking forward to that.
Excellent. So on that, let's ask the e-commerce question that's asked in this chat here. Mike, are you selling your swag online? And please, can others, I would welcome others to unmute yourself here and chip in on the e-commerce, because I know Jennifer from Innovation Island is on here, and they've been running a partner program to our resiliency program. So please, I'll leave it open here. Mike, are you selling your swag online?
Definitely, yes. So I'm looking to
Okay.
connect with Jennifer and set up either Shopify or whatever's out there to sell our swag online.
I just want to say Mike's doing a fantastic job on social already. So you're doing, thumbs up for over here. E-commerce is a huge deal, and we know it just doesn't happen overnight, and there isn't a silver bullet. So, but it's certainly time to, make some changes. And we use the tagline, get darn creative or get damn creative. And now's the time to do that and to pivot. I really enjoyed, if you did not listen to Dr. Bull's session last night, I highly encourage you to. So any questions, let me know.
Great, thanks for chipping in on that, Jennifer, I appreciate it. Any questions besides what's in the chat here? No? Walt, any more questions for our group?
No, but I did want to comment on an earlier part of the conversation that Paul was talking about, and how tourism needs to evolve, etc. I think Destination Greater Victoria, Paul, under his leadership, has done a great job of really making tourism and the city of Victoria synonymous. In other words, Victoria is known as a tourism destination, but in doing so, working very, very closely with the city of Victoria, the entire council and the mayor and the planning team, etc., to ensure that things that are going to evolve the destination for the benefit of residents also benefit visitors. But we find destinations all over the province, and Vancouver Island is no exception, where tourism happens and it's great, but it's almost an afterthought by local council. They welcome it, they know it's important, but when they're thinking about new options, new innovation, new businesses that they can attract, etc., new infrastructure that's being developed, tourism is kind of a second cousin in that consultation process, and it can't be going forward. I think destinations have to be so intertwined with the businesses and the tourism industry that's in those destinations, that as you look to the future, there cannot be any separation, to help not only the visitor economy, but to help the destination, because we know the benefits that visitors bring benefit residents in particular, and vice versa. So I think that has to happen now more deliberately than ever. It can't be a separate process. And similarly, many destinations have economic development offices. Well, I can tell you that many of them aren't focused on tourism or building the visitor economy. They're thinking about every other sector, natural resources and otherwise. They have to include tourism in that equation. So just a couple of points that may seem obvious, but it's also amazing how much it doesn't happen in our respective destinations around the province.
All right. Any comments on that here?
Yes, I've got one. John Tidbury, Councillor Port Hardy. We're very supportive of the tourist industry, and beside me I have Donna Galt, who is the chair of Port Hardy Tourism, and we're very, very supportive of tourism. But I have one question that's other than that. Being a gray-haired guy in the seniors, through the summertime there, I volunteer as to drive a vehicle through the summer, and so I'm in that category of a retired guy, and I look at that money to pay for little extras, that like a little trip somewhere else. And of course, I'm unable to collect that, any sort of money as a compensation. So just something, if you're talking to government, maybe you can mention about the seniors of BC.
Okay, thank you. Thanks,
Can I
John.
build on that comment? I think it's that's a great comment because building on Walt's comment about being a second cousin, I'm very happy that the support we receive, but our industry is always fighting for its fair share. It's often viewed as underpaying, or maybe not as sexy as some other industries. But that was a perfect example of how many what we would call kind of underrepresented groups, whether it be youth or seniors or people with disabilities. I myself, I don't mind sharing that I'm quite severely dyslexic, and I probably wouldn't, I couldn't write computer code, but I've had a wonderful career in tourism. So we have a lot of high-skilled people from e-commerce to engineering, but stories like your own, which you've just graciously shared, shows how the broad spectrum of society that is positively affected by our industry. And I'm hopeful that any elected officials or unelected officials on this call will recognize that. And that's part of telling our own story. So thank you.
Great. Thanks, John. Thanks. And John and Donna. So Walt, one of the questions I had for you, and maybe you could, we're getting close to the end here, but we have a new government, or will be a sworn in government here, I guess, in the next few weeks. In order for all of us to work with you and others to raise this exact issue of tourism and put it at the top of the agenda, what do you need from us?
Well, it's similar to stories that John just shared as well. When I asked about where are the gaps, that's the kind of information that's very, very helpful. I think what government is looking for is those stories of how tourism has impacted individual operators. We can talk about it on a global scale or provincial scale, or even as it relates to Vancouver Island. But hearing from individuals and the pain points and what they're experiencing is helpful for me. As an advocate, unfortunately, my job is to deal with the problems. I hear about the problems and I try to address them with partnerships throughout Vancouver Island, including with Anthony and Paul and others. But if I don't hear from you, I can't communicate those things to government. We now have a new government in place. The ministers haven't yet been appointed, but let's face it, our tourism minister may not return to that same portfolio. I'm hopeful that she would, because she certainly understands our industry. But if not, we've got an education process to undertake in the coming months with a new minister, if in fact that happens. But not only that, there will be new ministers across the board, several that are coming into government at the provincial level for the first time. They may not have a good understanding of our industry. So we can educate them as best we can, but until we tell them the personal stories that you're sharing with me and some of the other folks on this call, they don't really have a good grasp on the magnitude of the issues that we face, or even for that matter, let's turn it around and say the recommendations or the opportunities that we have going forward. So that's how I would love to hear from you. My contact information, if you don't have it already, is on our website. You can pick up the phone and call me on my cell. I'd just love to hear from you. So that's a good start.
Walt, one thing that's come up a couple times here is about lease deferrals and things like that. Anything you want to comment on that? You've been closer to that than me with the BC Hotel Association.
On lease deferrals, sorry.
Yeah, like lease deferral program is underutilized, and like for restaurants, et cetera. Lease deferral and revenues, like with
yeah, we haven't talked a whole lot about lease deferral, Anthony. We've talked a lot about rent relief and how that.
Oh, that's what I was trying to get at. Yeah.
Yeah, and that program, as you know, is changing, and in fact, the federal government wants to extend that until the middle of next year, and it's slightly different. And the best thing, and this was feedback again that we got from businesses like the ones here in this roundtable, that it wasn't working simply because the obligation was on landlords to apply as opposed to tenants. Now tenants can apply and will also receive some of those benefits. So federal government is listening. They are making some changes, and hopefully those will carry on through to next June. But having said that, though, it may not be enough for a lot of businesses. And so therefore, again, this goes back to the gap. Is there something else that the province can do to fill the gap? And that's something that I need to know about.
Okay, and Paul and Walt, just we're getting closer to the end, unfortunately, because now there's some good ones coming in here. But events, you've said you've built your strategy. We know over the years on events, sport tourism, cultural events, these kind of things. What is the latest on that? Either of you?
I'll comment maybe, and then Walt can talk more about the regulation, but maybe I can talk where the marketplace is at. I'm sad to report that the situation is really dire. You know, particularly on conferences, events, festivals, concerts, sporting events. I think that industry really doesn't see light at the end of the tunnel until there's a concrete vaccine. And we're finding, we went through the flurry of rebooking conferences. We had a record book of business at the Victoria Conference Center, but it's gone quiet now. And I think we need to just accept the reality that it's going to be a very long time until those industries come back. We have to move to phase 4 of the province of BC's restart plan, and I don't want to give false hope because it is central to our business plan. But you know, it's another area where we need a deliberate strategy to reopen, and we can't, you know, wait until everything's perfect. We need to be working in advance to help move things along so that when those medical milestones are hit, that we can reopen. And that's a huge segment of our industry and the economy that is often not seen or talked about enough.
And the one thing that I'll add to that, Anthony, is that in addition to what Paul just mentioned, we need to get to phase 4 there, and that's very true in this province. There is a group of meetings and events professionals from around the province that have come together and are putting together a proposal to see if under Section 43, the Provincial Health Officer of the Public Health Act, the Provincial Health Officer will take a look at the option of potentially expanding gathering restrictions, or at least loosening them, to allow for professionally organized meetings and events on a graduated basis. So if that sector can meet all of the health and safety protocols and then some, using best practice examples from other places in the world, these are the professionals that know how access and egress works. These are the professionals that understand space configuration. They can set up a room to make sure people are appropriately distanced. These are privately, professionally organized events that are not open to the general public. So you have that extra layer of security and making sure that people adhere to all the guidelines. That is being worked on now. Now, the one thing that's troublesome with all of this is what's the proper timing? When do we submit a proposal like this to see that it gets the attention of government for consideration? It's a graduated process, as I mentioned. It could be that we open it up to 100, then ultimately 200 and maybe 500. But unless we do so, because we just don't know when phase 4 will start, unless we do so under strict guidelines and under the guise of provincial and federal health officers, that sector of our industry is in deep trouble, as it has been already. Paul alluded to on the earlier call, I think you had 39 significant conventions canceled this year alone. That represents hundreds of millions of dollars of business, not only for tourism, but the whole supply chain involved. So that's something that we're working on, and we're going to figure out the right time to pull the trigger on it.
Okay. We've reached the end of our time here. I'm very appreciative of everybody taking this extra half hour to talk. Maybe we didn't touch on enough things. You know, innovation is always important. Walt, just lastly, when is the Tourism Industry Association conference? It's virtual this year. When is it for everyone?
It'll be at the start of March, and it looks like we are going to partner with the BC Hotel Association. It'll be a virtual event, and we'll likely run a week-long series of 2 streams, one that focuses on hotel and hospitality, the other that will focus on tourism, but we'll announce further details in the coming weeks. Thanks, Anthony.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Thank you, everyone. That ends the session. Again, thank you to VIEA for the opportunity. Thank you, panelists. Thank you all for attending. Thank you, Islanders. Really appreciate this, and we'll keep working together to move our industry forward. Thank you all.